All right, today we're gonna be making some chocolate chip cookies. So I got all my ingredients out here. We got our chocolate chips. Gonna be putting an egg in there. We got salt, vanilla extract, baking soda, flour. We got these oats right here because I have a nut allergy, so we can't use the pecans. So I'm gonna be swapping out the oats for the pecans. We got sugar, and then this is gonna be the focal point of our experiment here. So we're gonna be making 2 batches today. One of them is gonna be using butter as the main fat, and the other one's gonna be using shortening as the main fat. And we're gonna see how that affects the cookies, their taste, their texture, all those good things. All right, just to kind of explain what we're doing here, I'm gonna be making 2 separate batches. So the first one's gonna be using that butter, and the second one's gonna be using that shortening. So since we're splitting up the recipe in 2, we're gonna be starting with 3/4 a cup of flour, and then 3/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and then just 1/4 a teaspoon of that baking soda. So we're gonna get that all going here, and then we'll see you when we're sifting. All right, so we got all our dry ingredients in here now. We're just gonna mix those all together, and then after that, we're gonna add in those wet ingredients. All right, so we got the butter softened up a little bit in there, and then we're just gonna add that 1/2 cup of sugar in there. And then we're gonna go ahead and bring that all together in our mixer here. Just let that run till it's nice and mixed up. All right, so since we're splitting that recipe in half, we've divvied up the egg evenly into 2 half servings. And so we're gonna put 1/2 in here and continue beating, mixing that all in nice and good. All right, so now we're gonna add in that 1/2 tablespoon of vanilla and just mix that in for a little bit before we get those dry ingredients in there. All right, so now we're gonna add in our dry ingredients. So we're gonna mix these in very slowly on low beating in the mixer, and that's because we don't want that gluten to develop too fast, because that's gonna lead to a very tough texture and kind of ruin the feel of the cookies in the mouth. So I'm gonna add that in nice and slow here. All right, so now we're gonna add in that 1/2 cup of oats. All right, now we're gonna add in that 1/2 cup of chocolate chips and mix this all together. All right, so now we're gonna beat these in for 5 seconds on low. All right, so our batter's done being made here. Keep in mind, this is the butter batter, but we're gonna be doing the shortening batter next. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna use this tablespoon, and we're just gonna scoop up a nice tablespoon of that cookie dough and put it on this tray. I'm gonna roll it up a little bit nicer here just to kind of help with the shape. And this should make about 8 to 10 cookies, I would say. There we go, just like that. And we're gonna space those about 2 inches apart. And then we're gonna bake those for about 10 to 12 minutes at 375 degrees. And then they'll be delicious. All right, so we got all our cookies made up here. We're just gonna slide these into the oven, set at 375. We're gonna cook them in there for about 12 minutes. Like I said, about 12 minutes. We'll set it for 10 and give them a little look just to make sure they're doing good. And then we should have our first batch of cookies done. All right, so for this batch, we added in that vegetable shortening rather than the butter. So we're gonna add in that 1/2 cup of sugar, and then we're gonna cream that all together. All right, so here we got our shortening dough, and as you can see, it seems a little bit drier, a little bit less smooth, a little bit less combined. And that's due to the fact that the shortening actually coats the flour particles and prevents them from absorbing as much water. And like I mentioned earlier about that gluten development, when you hinder that, it's gonna give it a little bit more of a tougher texture, a little bit drier, a little bit less desirable. So we're gonna roll these up into those balls just like we did with the other batch, and then we're gonna bake them and see how they compare. So as I'm forming up these cookie dough balls here that use the shortening, I'm really noticing how much drier it is. You can kind of see that here. So that shortening, it actually forms a ball pretty well, as you can see there. But it definitely takes a lot more effort to form these balls. And that's due to what I said earlier about how the shortening kind of inhibits the water from being absorbed into the flour. But I just wanted to point out that these are taking a lot longer to make, and the last batch was definitely a lot easier to make the cookies out of. All right, so we got all our shortening balls made up. We're gonna pop those in the oven for about 12 minutes once again. And we'll give them both a taste test and see how they turned out. All right, so both of the batches are done now. We've done a thorough taste testing, and we've concluded that the texture on these is really good. They're a little bit more cakey and a little bit less cookie-like, but the texture on these is a lot more like grainy and a little bit drier. However, we actually determined that we prefer these. The flavor is just a lot better. Like, it's just really tasty. Whereas these are a little bit blander, not as like explosive in the flavor, doesn't hit you as hard. And so the science behind that is that, like I've been mentioning, the shortening really kind of dries out that flour, kind of makes it harder to get that moisture in there. Whereas these, there was no issues getting the moisture in, but almost too much because it was a little bit too cakey. But yeah, they were both pretty tasty. And I think if I were to make these cookies again, we would do like a half butter, half shortening mix, because that would really combine like the best of both worlds here and make a really good cookie.